How long does it take to climb a 50-meter slab? When you sent either of those, or yeah, either of
Yeah.
those routes, how long are you on the wall for?
For the walk of life, I know I was on the wall for a while. It was an hour, I think, an hour straight, which okay, so I feel like that was a long time. And when you're on the wall, it feels like even longer. It feels like you're on there for like multiple hours. It felt like I was there all day. I climbed the walk of life slower than I climbed Once Upon a Time. And most of that is me telling my anxious kind of like I can't sit still self to rest even longer at the rests. And I even told Tom beforehand, I said, if I'm at one of the rests and it looks like I'm going to head out before I've waited enough time, can you just yell at me and be like, rest more, you know? I'm like, because in my head, I get like, I get bored and then I just like want to do things and I'm fiddling and I'm just like, I can't stand still. And so I really like forced myself to take extra long rests. And it actually helped that Al was filming from above. He was on a static and even next to me. And so whenever I was at a rest, he was like, okay, I'm going to jug up. And so I had to wait for him to jug up too. And it was like good because it was like a distraction. And I would just like
Mm.
wait and be like talking to him. I was pretty chilled throughout, I would say. I was talking to Al kind of the whole time while I was resting. I was just like, how's it going there? How are you like, are you feeling good? And he's like, what? He's like, how are you doing? He's like, focus on the climb. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I need a distraction.
You said something interesting a second ago. You said, coming back the second time, you just knew so much. You knew so much more about the whole process, how to project something like that. What were some of those big lessons? What did you learn from the first round that you really noticed coming back for the second round?
Yeah, if we want to get really nerdy and analytical, that's my favorite because I feel like I had this equation and I was like, okay, amazing. I had a week to project it. So I first broke up my days into projecting days with rests. And then towards the end, I was like, in my last day I had a Sunday to Sunday. So on that last Sunday, I knew I was gonna have to rest on Saturday, in theory, if I was going for the send that week. And then I kind of worked backwards from there. And so once I had that template, I was like, okay, great. Now it's time to project. First, it's about just basically doing a bunch of top rope, like shunting, solo climbing on this route and just like figuring out the climb. And in order to do that, I broke up the climb into parts, into sections, which I kind of go into in the movie Queen Lines, but I had felt like it was a book and a story. And so I kind of made up a story to go with the climb. And that helped me remember the movements and feel a flow. So I had chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and then an epilogue. So those were my 5 parts. And then I would just like tell the story to myself every day, basically every night, because it was just a week. So it was like really concerted efforts, right? There were like little tick points that I knew I had to hit. I was like, okay, by my 3rd day projecting on the climb, I really want to be able to link all of the chapters together clean on a top rope without placing gear, just the moves, just the movements. And if I can do that, then I'll be ready for the next step. And I just kind of took it like checkpoint by checkpoint. And so once I physically could do all the moves in a row on a shunt, I was like, okay, cool, time to figure out gear. And so then the next day I went down and I figured out gear, or at least, first run of figuring out gear and where I would place them. And I like really like sat in the positions and like practiced placing them because that's an important thing you have to go through. That was kind of the goal of that day. And then the next session, I was like, okay, great. Now I have to link it from the bottom to the top while placing the gear. And it has to feel really good. Like there can't be a moment where I don't feel good. Otherwise, that's going to delay my process. And I'll have to
And
just take that into,
this is still
yeah,
on a shunt for this. You're
this
like
is still on
practice.
a shunt.
Okay,
Yeah,
got
I'm
it. Yeah.
basically solo climbing the whole time just because I'd spend hours on the wall. And it's hard to have someone belay you, especially on something that long. And the next check mark was being able to do the climb while placing gear twice in a row. And then once I got there, I practiced the sky hooks because that was harder to do. And then I felt like I was ready for the lead. But there was one more thing right before the lead. I went down and I looked at all the gear again and I memorized out of the, the pieces I placed where I would put my right rope and my left rope, because for once upon a time I crossed my ropes and I was like, this is not happening again. So I was like, this is right, and I just like memorized left, left, right, right. So I had a story. I physically knew I could do it. I had all my placements planned, and it was just like this progression that felt so logical that by the time I got to the send day, I was just like, yeah, okay, cool. We did it. I did all the steps. I checked off all the boxes. I'm just going to do this now. There was like not much emotion involved in this project, whereas once upon a time I was clearly like overcome with emotion, had to like fight a lot of fears on the wall because I just like wasn't as prepared and didn't know where to put the ropes, right or left, over my foot, under my foot. On Once Upon a Time, I even asked Pete, I was like, do I have to put my foot over the ropes? And he was just like taking the video. He's like, oh my God. He's like, yes, like you have to, like, don't get your foot under the rope. Like you can't do that. And it was just like, I just didn't know the basics of climbing on, over gear. So yeah. Sorry that I went so analytical. I like literally drew it out. Like I drew out the climb. I have
even more questions. This is amazing. I loved the chapter breakdown because that's in the film, in the Queen Lines film. And I'm used to breaking down a climb and thinking of it in sections, but just using the word chapters and thinking of it like a book was so different and so fun to me. And then the names, that was really fun too. Do you remember the names of all the chapters off the top of your head?
Oh yeah. So the first chapter is the spicy hook. And I think it's funny for a lot of reasons, not only because we're using sky hooks. It's like you get there and it's immediately really challenging climbing, like more challenging than you want it to be without gear, for 40 feet. And you have no gear, like you just have sky hooks. So it really like is just like, bam. It's like if you're reading a book, it's the first chapter that like throws you in the middle of the action and it's all like, let's rewind and see how we got there, and then it takes you into chapter 2. Nice. Like it's a good book. You're like, oh, I want to know how it like got murdered or whatever just happened. And then chapter 2 is like, okay, let's do some character development. Like it's not the most exciting, but it's necessary. So this is like all slots, good gear, not so much gear, but good gear, we're not talking about fiddling in RPs or micro cams. We're just like, okay, wait, they are zeros, I guess. But like compared to the rest of the route, it's good gear. And that's chapter 2. So it's like steady character development. And then you go to chapter 3. And that's like the meat, the juice of the whole book, because this is when like now you're hooked in, you got that development. And now you have to like try hard consistently. There's this traverse section that requires full attention. It is very much a crux of the route and it's sustained. So it's not like there's one crux move. It's just like a big section of really difficult climbing and placing gear pieces that are really fickle and hard to place well. And so you have to just like be fully concentrated, locking off, placing these nuts and cams as well as you can. And that's chapter 3. It ends on 2 triangles.
What was the name of chapter 3 again?
I called it the juice.
The juice. Okay.
The juice, or the meat of it. Yeah, the juice. And then chapter 4 is that's the conclusion of the book. That's where the physical crux is, actually. There's a lot of bearing down on crimps. And that's basically what I called the conclusion, because it's like the final test. It's like you've gotten through the juice, you've gotten through this whole novel, you're like ready for it to end, and there's just like one last thing in order for the book to kind of feel like it's a book. And it has this like beautiful physical crux of pure crimping, hard, so hard. I was like, on my fingers, they're like tiny little like 2 mil crimps. And then it was really, but you're on slabs, so you get more out of the holds, kind of. And then and then you place this, like you do a little traversing, you finish off the book, and then you place this monster piece in a crack. Like you could build an anchor in this crack. Like you're just like, oh my God, I am so safe. And then after that, you run it off to the top. And the top I called the epilogue, because you have this amazing piece under you. Now you're totally in a safe zone. You have one tricky balancy step up move, but then you're kind of just on your way out. And this is when I would joke to Tom about being like, like 10 years later, Tom and Anna opened up their own, cookie store. And like, it's just like the epilogue, like everything's like rounding out in the story. This is like the 20 years later, and you just kind of enjoy it. And then that's the walk of life. That's life.
That's life.